Thank you so much for joining. I hope you had a nice lunch. This talk today effectively is going to be looking at how we can save you guys money, really, in a nutshell. I'm conscious that one of the things that happens as we move into Q4 is that spend gets a lot tighter. And really, this talk was inspired based on those conversations that we have with clients, which is like, hi, we don't have the money for this time, or like, maybe we can put this onto next year's talk. And you're just sat there like, okay, this is great, but we need to do this now. So effectively, what I'm going to be looking at is spend efficiencies and trying to work out ways in which we can find smaller pots of money to do more exciting things. Also, listening to all of today's talks as well, I'm conscious that this might be a bit of a housekeeping talk, but having done a lot of audits over the last sort of 6 weeks, it's become apparent that perhaps some of the best practices aren't really being met. So look at me being all high and mighty, but I arguably want it to sort of serve as a chance really to everyone to go back and be like, I need to do that. I need to double check that. So the talk is broken out into 4 parts. It's going to look at what spend efficiency is and what it isn't, and I'll go into that shortly. Part 2 looks at the basics. So these are the foundations that literally everybody should have sorted. Again, if you take nothing else away from this talk and you only take these basics away, I'm genuinely going to be really happy because having, like I said, done a few audits recently, a lot of the basics, well, these 2 things that I really pull out in particular, they're there every time, and I'm like, oh God, have you fallen for that? Like, you're better than this. Part 3 is the importance, and effectively that looks at our audience more specifically. Are they new users? Are they returning users? And what can we do with that? But also it looks, again, more into some more detail around specific things we can try and do to save that extra money for us. And part 4 is the holiest of holy grails, which I won't go into too much just yet, because I'd like you all to sit around, so yeah. So this is me, that's Fraser. I've been working on paid media now for 7 years, and look at me, I'm going to try and become paid media's Martin Lewis. So shout out Martin. Paid media is my specialty, not like graphic design, so did do that on slides. But effectively, I think we all need to think a bit Martin Lewis when we do auditing and we think about saving money, because I think it's really easy for all of us to just fall into really basic patterns when we've got really like boring accounts that we're sat with and we're like, oh, I do this, I do that. And normally I find when it comes to like handing over to other colleagues, if perhaps there's like internal change and stuff like that, you have to do an internal handover, it can get quite embarrassing when you're like, I haven't actually done anything exciting on this account for the last like 2 months. So I'm trying to like save you that embarrassment. And basically by doing that, we all need to be Martin Lewis. We all need to think Martin, effectively. As an extra preface, this talk was also inspired by the brilliant Will Reynolds. He did a talk at MozCon in 2019, which looks into granularities around spend. And specifically, the thing I found really inspiring was the concept of, and I'm going to get kind of controversial here now, but for all you like pro Googleites out there, the concept of we're constantly losing data on a regular basis with Google. We're constantly losing what we can do, what we can't do. And why are we just sat here going like, yeah, you can do that. CPCs can go up, I don't mind. Like, we should be fighting back a little bit and saying, look, you know what, my client doesn't have a lot of money. I have to be working a lot harder for this. And there's times when I almost want to fight back and say, no, Google, you can't get that money. So that's where spend efficiency comes in. And it basically tries to get you to think about how we can try and get different pools of money, really, to do more exciting things. So what is spend efficiency? Again, shout out my graphic design skills. Also shout out Canva Pro. Spend efficiency in and of itself, and this is the Fraser definition, is, like I said, finding multiple pots of spend, which are perhaps smaller areas and more granular areas, basically, that we can effectively get multiple times throughout the account, rather than going in and making wholesale changes to campaigns. So prime example of this would be a client says, we need to pull back spend over the next couple of months because we've got, I don't know, more money going into email or more money going into whatever. What I think there's a tendency to do is for people to just look at it and go, oh my God, I need to pause this campaign because it's not performing. I need to pause this one because it's rubbish. This hasn't been live for like 2 months. It's just been running in the background or whatever. That effectively isn't spend efficiency. And what normally happens is if you pause those, it has a bigger impact on wider campaigns, and you have to justify it in reports, and right, this is because of this. And again, so I'm trying to save you words here. It's all about efficiency. So the basics. So these are the things that, again, I think we all genuinely, like, if you don't go out after this talk and go and change these things like, immediately, I'm going to find you, basically, and I'm going to make you do it. So Matt spoke about this at the start, but presence and interest. This one for me, I think it's almost borderline like negligent from Google that this is almost the default. So for those of you who don't know what presence and interest is, where were you for Matt's talk this morning? Because it's a brilliant definition of it. But basically, it's showing ads to people who are either based in a certain location or have an interest in that location. And again, for a lot of people, this is kind of irrelevant. I will say that there's a massive caveat to that, which is if we've got like potentially like a hotel client or you've got a certain location, a restaurant, all that kind of stuff. Presence and interest can work and it can be great. What I typically tend to find is that the presence side or the interest side of it can be a bit irrelevant. Again, how is Google defining that interest? If I perhaps search for, I don't know, Lisbon once, does that mean I'm interested in it moving forwards? So again, we have to almost challenge that. And this typically for me here, is one that comes up quite a lot in spend efficiency point of views, because it's, I'm going to use a big word, hemorrhaging spend a lot of the time. And normally performance is rubbish, basically. But of course, you need to remember it's recommended. So if Google recommends it, then it must be good. Shout out the recommendations tab. So this is why I hate presence and interest, and that's an actual picture of me there. But I had a client that I was running at a previous agency, and they were a super fancy client. They were a car parking client, and they were running a localized campaign for a car park in and around the Midlands. And this campaign had a really high spend. They were also, as a side note, running a separate campaign advertising this car park to other people and around the country, internationally. And effectively, they wanted to be known, super interesting title, as the place to park in the Midlands. That wasn't their content title. I've just come up with that now, but yeah. They believed, like I said, that location targeting was applied, so that they had this one campaign here which was just targeting hyperlocal, and the other one wasn't targeting hyperlocal, it was targeting internationally. Of course, otherwise I wouldn't be doing this talk. It wasn't applied. Roughly £3,000 a month was coming from Germany. And again, this would be fine. This would be totally fine. If people were booking and traffic was coming, really at the end of the day, you can turn around to the client and perhaps get out of it and be like, well, we saw revenue. But because they had that other campaign running, not only are we potentially damaging the performance of that one, but we're also obviously contradicting what the client wants us to do. We saw clicks, again, 400 clicks, that £3,000 spend. Think about the CPC on that one. But again, 0 conversions and 0 assisted conversions. So just gone, like £3,000. And then thinking about like pots of money, that's £3,000 that we can automatically just say back to the client, potentially. Again, I realise there's massive caveats out here, but that's £3,000 we can pull back from making a relatively small change. What I will say is a massive precaution is obviously monitor these things. Don't take my word as gospel, case by case basis, and all that kind of stuff. Search partners, I'm not going to go into too much detail about this. I don't want to be the guy in 2023 that spends time talking about search partners. Like, I feel like a lot of us kid ourselves into saying it's doing okay. It's normally rubbish. Like, if you've got a really, really low spending account where spend is really important and protecting that spend is really important, normally, I guess that I realise this one probably spends like an oomph of the budget, but we're talking about efficiency here and trying to save those ones. Technical term again. And this is probably, like, this for me is probably the biggest when it comes to the basics, and it's actually remembering what an actual conversion is. Again, mind blown. But with the introduction of GA4 and it basically becoming a lot more easier to track certain conversions, I think we've got, again, sweeping statement, a bit lazy in terms of pulling in a lot of random conversions into Google Ads. And we need to remember that Google Ads is a machine that we need to be feeding with the correct data. If we're feeding in stuff that's just fluff, or that's just effectively secondary conversions, we're obviously diluting that down. We're going to be raising these costs up, and it's becoming more difficult for us. So we need to remember, what is the actual primary conversion focus with this? If we've got an account that's spending £5,000 a month and the client turns around to you and says, this is really important for me, I want to turn off Google Ads in the next quarter if it doesn't work, and you go into the account and you see that primary conversion, and like, hold on to your seats because I saw this the other day, one of them was set to page views. And if you're setting primary conversions to, or if you're tracking page views in general, get out. But if you're setting primary conversions to page views, like, seriously, like it's daylight robbery. So please consider what your primary conversions are. If someone says to you, like, we're pulling back on spend, we need to think about spend, think about this, because it's really, really important. This is not to say dismiss secondary conversions. By all means, observe them, perhaps make them a primary conversion. But effectively, when we need to think about pulling back spend and being really tight with things, we need to really focus in what the important things are. So talking about important, we're going to talk about the importance. Technically, this is the juicy data bit. But really, since writing that, I've been thinking more about this. And I basically want us to try and think here about LinkedIn's favorite word at the moment, other than ChatGPT, which is, shout out ChatGPT talks as well, by the way, they were great, is attribution. And I feel like everyone uses that word so much, but no one really knows what it means on one hand. And secondly, from a spend efficiency point of view, in particular the lower spend accounts, attribution for a lot of people and using those massively high costing third-party attribution tools is out of reach. So then we need to come into account and think, well, okay, what have we got that we can actually use? And there's Google Ads and there's GA4. And before anybody shoots me down, I'm very conscious that these are by no means the best. But I'm just thinking what we're trying to basically pull out here is patterns of similarity. So what is one showing us and what is the other one showing us? And what do they kind of show us? Again, I'm conscious that if you've got a lower spending account, attribution is still massively important. But if we can turn around to a client and say, look, this is showing us one thing and this is showing us another thing, we need to perhaps test this and see whether or not our users are new users or returning users. And as a result, we're bidding more for new users and returning users. That A, makes sense, and B, is a great way of saving money potentially. What I will say is that obviously there's thresholds for us to meet there in order to bid on new and returning users. But if we can test this, and as one of the speakers said earlier, have a hypothesis to allow us to test these things, this is a pretty solid hypothesis. That's me. I want to also caveat this. I'm a 28-year-old man with 2 kids, and I took that photo. Like, what is my life? But how, again, is it 2023 and people aren't using scripts enough? I realize that scripts, sometimes people I used to work with hear the word scripts and they go, like, I don't do JavaScript, that's not me. I'm by no means the most technical person. I'm pretty sure you've probably got that all by now. But I can still do scripts because there's stuff out there that literally tells you that there's information out there, wow, words. Information out there that spoon feeds this to you. Literally, there's loads of blog content which says, copy and paste this script, put it into your account. This is what you do to amend it. And from a spend efficiency point of view, there's loads. So engram checkers, engrams blew my mind when I found out about them. If you don't know about engrams, go away and find out about them because genuinely they are insane. And they also help wider teams, SEO teams, content teams, that kind of thing. Quality score checkers, spend report checkers, again, they sound really basic, but if you're saving time, it allows you to do more cool things. And again, down the line, they might start pulling things out for you that you just completely missed. So from a spend efficiency point of view, scripts are great. So next up is the holiest of holy grails. And effectively, I think what I want to pre-say before I show the slide, like I'm giving it proper hype now, is I want us all to think of it with our data hats on rather than copywriters. So the holiest of holy grails for me is content. As I said at the start, we're losing so much data. We're losing it on a daily basis. Stuff we can do, stuff we can't do. Dare we even talk about search queries? But one of the few things that we still have a glimmer of control over, forget auto-applied recommendations, forget PMAX, is content. And what I want us to do with that effectively is to genuinely, if we're going to A, think Martin, we have to B, think client, God forbid. And I want us to use the data that we've got to think client and really think whether our content actually relates to that client. Again, earth-shatteringly new news, but not enough of us are doing it really. So dig into the data. What does it say about our audience? So we've got Google Ads data, obviously. We've got Search Console data. We might have BigQuery data. We might have Business Insight data. Genuinely look at it and think, right, what are users searching to get on our site? And from a first point of call, does our ad copy reflect this? I'm not saying keyword stuff, but just effectively take this and think, right, okay, all these searches here are relating to this. This is a good starting point for us to consider. our content and whether or not it relates to that. On the other hand, we take it then on site and then we think, right, okay, we've got all these amazing custom reports we can start to build now in GA4. So on this one hand, we've got all these brilliant ideas people are searching for, but when they come on the site, amazingly, what are they doing? And again, we need to take that data and think, okay, go back to the original question, does our content reflect this? If they're spending time on an info page, for example, maybe they need more information. Does our ad copy say, learn more, that kind of thing? Basically, what I'm trying to get you guys to think of is actually dig into the data we've got accessible and really genuinely think, does our copy reflect this? Consider additional platform performance. So again, I'm conscious, having worked in the agencies for like 7 years, what can typically tend to happen is you just get siloed a lot and you think, we don't really typically talk to social or whatever. Again, sweeping statement. Talk to them. What's working well? What isn't working well? Look in GA4. Is it working well? What are you guys doing that's great? Relate it back to the data you've got. Thanks for telling me this anecdotal piece of data. I'm going to go back and have a look. Oh my God, it does match up. That's great. We can apply this to our copy. What I'm trying to basically build here is this massive pattern around personas that actually we're starting to really learn our audience, really understand what it is they want to do across all of these platforms when they land on the site and before they even get to us. Similarly, reach out to the Dear team in SEO. If you're anybody SEO in the crowd, I love you. These guys obviously do this on a daily basis, but also have access to wider tools that the majority of people in paid media don't really use. So things like Screaming Frog, SEMrush, Ahrefs, they've got access to loads of stuff. And again, that's only going to build that more important, richer data. That's the word richer. And get your spy on. And this effectively means looking at competitors and what competitors are doing. What I don't want to say, though, is when we look at competitor bidding, we don't want to think of it as, that's cool, I'll take that and I'll put it in my ad copy. We need to think, they've done this, I've got all this data here, does this match up? It's the same conversation we're having internally, but with external sources. And effectively, it allows us to have a good steer as to A, our competitors are on the ball, or B, let's avoid that like the plague. And have fun with it. Like, because genuinely, like going all CSI on things, going proper Martin Lewis and digging around in the data is genuinely can be quite fun. It's a good afternoon spent. Shows how sad I am. But again, when you go into audits, and speaking personally, when I find these things, you're like, that's nice, I can do that. And what it means then, from our perspective, is we can do more cool things. We can start to reach out and try and get in wider teams in the agency and that kind of thing. So from a business point of view, it has a massive scope, but also from a spend perspective, it works. So just have fun with it, genuinely enjoy it. Think to yourself, right, I'm gonna have an afternoon just trying to save some money. And yeah, enjoy it. So as a recap, these are the basics. So again, remember to check presence and interest. Remember to check your networks. Consider what an actual conversion is. Again, it's kind of ironic that I'm sat here saying check it when I didn't check the basics at the top there. Importance, so what things are important? Again, what does the attribution data suggest? Is it new? Is it returning? What are we doing to optimize around that? Can we make better use of scripts? Or for some, can we use scripts? Come on. And the holiest of holy grails, of course, can we adapt the content that we've got based on what we're seeing in platform and everywhere else? And again, think Martin and have fun. That Photoshop there made me slightly uncomfortable, the size of his hat. Don't know what it is. So that's me. So thank you very much for listening to me waffle. It's been great. And I've been Fraser Andrews. So thank you very much.